places of public memory are very, very partial, and so people are going to get different stuff from it. The third argument, or general argument, is that the monument invites judgment not only by art world elites, that is it art? Is it, do they give it a hand? Do they give it a fist? But by the general public. It invites judgment by the general public, the folks who actually see it, the folks who drive around downtown Detroit looking at this thing, and the implications for what it means for a local populace in Detroit. That is, the importance is in part how the local folks sort of interpret it and what they do with it. And again, I know these arguments are sort of vague, but at least this sort of sets us up to sort of understand how they're going to organize the essay, and these are general arguments, and they get into some more specific contentions later on. The next slide, slide 6, justification for the study. Again, I like the way they're doing this, because even though they sort of justified looking and studying this particular monument at the beginning of the chapter, in the first paragraph, they continue to do so. And this is on page 89 as well. And basically what they say is that a lot of African American monuments and memorials emphasize progress. Note the African American monument on the State House grounds. The way it is actually laid out, the aesthetic form of it, is all about progress. This monument to Joe Louis is much more abstract. I'll let you read the description of it, and maybe you have been to it, and if you've ever spent some time in Detroit. I have never, well, yes, I have been in Detroit. I enjoyed my 2 hours in the airport. So it's hard to figure out. It's not, and it's not just about progress, or it's tough. It's abstract, and so that's another reason for trying to figure out what's going on here. Okay, the next slide. The basic values that we can interpret from this monument. Now they're getting into their analysis. Now they're talking about, writing about, their arguments and their interpretation of what they think is going on here from their rhetorical stance. And there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And then what they do is they sort of give you all this evidence and describe and write about the monument. And then on page 93, they sort of flesh out what they see as the primary values that we can interpret from the monument. The fist, they say, makes visible the hegemonic processes and values of political, corporate, and cultural elites. So the material circumstances, that is the production in the sense of the actual, the fist. It was sponsored by Sports Illustrated. A lot of people wanted to have their say and everything like that. And so that's one of the values that's part of this. Who has power to make something like this actually happen? To come to have an idea, and then you have a big fist in the middle of Detroit. I couldn't do that. It takes the elites to make stuff like that happen. Second, the modern aesthetic values of much urban public art, and that's basically some of the aesthetic forms and stuff like that they're talking about. I'm not an artist, so I'm not quite sure what they were talking about here. But see the description on page 92. But it is really interesting the way they talk about the abstract nature of it. And the third one, this is the most important thing to me, metonymies of racial and racist images and ideologies, rhetorical figures and resources. This metonymy is, as I just said, very, very important, and more so perhaps than the first 2 values that they talk about. Metonymy. That's a very important concept when we're thinking about places of public memory. A metonymy is a part that sort of represents or stands in for a larger whole. And so one of the arguments that they make is that the fist, this is my Columbia College stuff, representing. The fist stands in for Joe Louis. It's not a statue of Joe Louis. In fact, I think they mentioned that his wife said that that could be anybody, which could be good or bad. But so that's there, but also it stands in for lots of other things. It stands in for African American oppression, African American progress. It stands in for larger sort of political struggles when it comes to issues of race, class, and all that type of stuff. So one of the things that I always want you to think about is when you're looking at particular monuments, what is that? Is that standing for something larger? Is it part of that sort of represents or again stands for some sort of larger thing that's going on? The next slide here, slide 8. Because of the values, those values that we just talked about, one of the things they say, and this is an important thing here, is that they evoke very strong emotions. And so what are those emotions that they think this particular monument evokes? One could be fear. They say that it sort of looks like a, it does, it looks like something, I'm going to punch you. Mama said knock you out. So fear of sort of a fear of racialized violence, they say, fear of otherness within urban spaces. And read that stuff on when those folks whitewashed it. It's pretty interesting. A fear of danger that sort of goes along with it. And thus it highlights, they say, and this is another metonymy here, I would argue, the tensions of urban experiences in Detroit. Fist. You see the fist? It evokes strong emotional responses because the fist stands in for tensions and the urban experiences of Detroit in the 60s and the 70s and beyond. And the final paragraph on page 95, and I might say a little bit about this, but I know that you can read, is, I think, amazingly clear and sort of, it sort of shows what they're trying to say here. And I will read a little bit. As this discussion indicates, the sculpture highlights the tensions of the urban experience of Detroit and urban history, as we shall demonstrate below, involving economic downswings, rioting, rebellion, white flight to the suburbs, and social and urban planning policies that left African Americans with few choices, locking them into increasingly depressed and deteriorating communities. The symbolic and material aspects of the fist suggest both efforts to literally break out of such a downward spiral and the fears of those outside the city that African American individuals and communities will indeed break out and enter their own predominantly white middle class havens. It therefore evokes, among other things, anger, frustration, pain, determination, and hope on the part of African Americans, as well as fear and efforts at containment on the part of whites and their political representatives. In terms of representing hope for African Americans, one supporter of the monument saw the monument as symbolizing the black community fighting against all odds, rising out of obscurity, refusing to be a passive victim of an unjust system. So again, it just shows you how the responses are quite different. And all of that is part of the meaning. All of that is part of, as a rhetorician, you're trying to figure out what are the possible multiple meanings or interpretations that we can make about a monument like the monument to Joe Louis. Okay, the next slide, slide number 9, stuff about location and meaning making. One of the things, again, and this is tied to some of the stuff that we just talked about, all of this, the meaning of this thing, it's not only meaningful emotionally, but the meaning, it has lots of meanings. It means Joe Louis and the story of Joe Louis and the heroic nature, the national hero Joe Louis and bringing race together. But also it's about the history of Detroit and all the various things that have gone on in Detroit, the economic problems and all sorts of different things. And one of the things that they talk about, which I thought was really, really interesting, they call this black social memory. It's in part how that memory, and this is not just for the African American community, but perhaps it resonates a great deal with the African American community. The memory is spatial material because in part how African Americans have been displaced. They talk about how the interstate system was, really screwed up black neighborhoods. We have the white flight, and they had the root shock that the book talks about. That the spatial and changes that have occurred have just destroyed neighborhoods and communities, and that's on page 98. And the middle paragraph on page 99, I think, when it comes to that type of thinking, that type of interpretation, is amazingly important. It starts, I'll read just a little bit of it, but I'll let you, again, read it. In the monument to Joe Louis, then, the past and present are brought together in a visualization of the relationship between power and force as they have played out in Detroit. And so take a look at all that type of stuff because it's really, really interesting. The last paragraph, or last sentence in that paragraph says, the monument references the positioning of African Americans as other. It also symbolizes the fight to move beyond imposed limits that have become concretized, that is made concrete, in the form of urban planning that constrained the movement of African Americans both within and outside the city limits, and that aided and encouraged the movement of whites to suburban areas. So again, that's all part of the meaning of this fist. Another part of the monument, for a while I already sort of said that. It's about shiny cars, but also racial strife. And then, of course, the last paragraph of that section, which is the last paragraph of every section in every book, is usually pretty good. 102 to 103 sort of sums up this aspect of the chapter. Within a cultural context marked by race, therefore, the physical location and particularly the issue related to access and planning of place and space are important factors in the signification. I can't say that. Of a commemorative site. So, and all that means it's all part of what it means. That's all it says. Due to the complexity and divisiveness of race relations in the United States in general and Detroit in particular, characteristics that translate into how space is allocated, who lives where, and the good and the bad parts of cities, artifacts that memorialize individuals and events that are erased are essentially complicated, unfinished text that, as we have demonstrated here, draw from outside the structures of the memorials themselves to form the character of the structure. And so, again, part of the meaning, that fist, that monument, also means all the various urban planning and everything like that that oppressed African Americans. The next slide here, inviting judgment about the monument. They are they're basically saying that unlike other stuff, oftentimes that's in an urban environment, like a big old building, this monument at least is a vehicle for public discussion and debate, particularly about race issues. So it invites social dissonance. It invites us to argue about issues of race. And one of the things when it comes to the reaction, it's not like everybody thinks it's awesome. The reactions are all over the place. Yeah, this is awesome. This is cool.